Mark Seymour, footballer, administrator, commentator and leader. In fact, chairman of our competition for a long period of time, had presided over a number of difficult issues and also saw the transition into netball and a more inclusive sporting organisation. A much respected leader and a great contributor over a significant period of time, and our newest inductee into the SFNL Hall of Fame. This is the Mark Seymour story. Mark Seymour, thanks for your time.
Pleasure, Ian.
Now, a long time ago, not that long, at McKinnon Footy Club in the under-16s, I think it might have been your father told you that you should have concentrated on school not long after you started.
Yeah, that was in about 1971.
Right.
Yeah, my father had a very big history in football, certainly in the local area. Lived in Fitzroy, was brought up in Fitzroy and played for Fitzroy Seconds, and probably would have played in the seniors, except he injured his cartilage jumping off a tram going to the army barracks and never played again. But he had a very high opinion of me, but not as a footballer.
Right.
He told me to give up.
Perhaps as a scholar. He might have been right later on. Something happened at your beloved Bentley Football Club in the 1980 football season that led you to ultimately make a decision that maybe your father was right, and football administration was more important than playing. Yeah,
the coach of the reserves and I didn't quite see eye to eye about a decision he made in round one of that season. I'd done all the pre-season and had problems with blisters on my heels, so I couldn't play the last practice game. And I thought I was probably doing well enough to play in the seniors, but no, played in the seconds that first game and played about 25 minutes of the first quarter, and Bentley's leading by about 8 goals. And I was taken off by the runner, and I thought, oh, that's all right, I'll have a bit of a spell.
Yeah, as you would.
And I got put back on at the 25-minute mark of the last quarter in the back pocket. And at that stage, Bentley was leading by about 32 goals to 3. So I wasn't going to see much of the ball in the last 5 minutes. And I went back to the club rooms and had a beer, and then decided my football career was over. Don't know whether I would have made the same decision today. Probably would have been a little bit more calm and gone and asked a few questions. But in those headstrong young days, I just decided I'd had enough.
So all the toys come out of the cot.
Yep.
Now, I've got the word that there's also an interesting story around you becoming the secretary of Bentley Footy Club.
We can blame Gary Matlock for that. A friend of mine and I worked at Oakley Court, and the annual meeting was on, and Gary had rung me and said, look, we want as many of the players to get along because we want to make sure we've got a quorum, and it starts the year off well, so please be there. So my mate had nothing to do with the Bentley Football Club, but I said, look, how about we go to the pub first, we'll have a few beers and then go up to the annual meeting. And he said, no, I don't want to do that. And I said, well, look, I'll buy you the beers. So he said, all right, well, I'll do that. So we went and had a few pots, and then we go to the meeting, and we're sitting there waiting for it to start, and Gary Matlock comes up to me and says, look, Mark, we've got a bit of a problem here that there's nobody nominated for secretary. So what we want to do is nominate you, but don't worry about that because we'll get someone else to do it, but it's just so we don't lose face. I think if I hadn't have had...
a great salesman.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't have worked except I'd had 6 pots, and so I said, well, yeah, okay, yeah, that's not a problem. So I'm duly elected as secretary, and of course, they never found anybody, and once your name's there, everybody's expected to be secretary, so I took over as secretary.
There must have been some admin skills, Mark, because we skip forward a little bit. In another part of Victoria, Chief Executive Officer of the Traralgon Football Club when they entered the Victorian Football League competition.
Yeah.
But also before that, there's a coaching role there as coach of the under-19s.
Yeah, I coached there in the late 80s. I coached the under-19s.
So a bit of a time out there, and I believe a 34-2 coaching record.
In the home and away, yes.
But a sacked coach nonetheless.
Yeah. 34-2 in the home and away, 0-4 in the finals. And the 0-4 in the finals was the thing that the board decided was the thing that in the end caused me to lose the job.
Okay, so playing, tick that. Coaching, tick that. But the board at Traralgon must have thought something, they made you the CEO.
Yeah, that was about 10 years later.
Right.
So there'd been a bit of a gap, and I forgave them, and they thought I was a good bloke, so that was okay. And the job came up. There's an interesting story about that too, because I've still got the letter from the Traralgon Football Club telling me I didn't get the job. And Glenn Elliott, the former St Kilda footballer, was working in football in South Australia, and he got the job. And the funny thing was they had a press conference with the local media and the local TV to announce it, and the chairman of the board goes out to announce who the new CEO of Traralgon Football Club is in the VFL, and just as he's going out there, he gets a text message saying, "I'm not coming, I've got a better offer here in South Australia."
So you were second choice CEO at Traralgon.
Yes.
And their transition into and then later on out of the VFL.
Well, it was a terrific experience because there's not often you've got to build a football club from the ground. And when I got there, I started on the 5th of December, and we had 4 months to recruit a VFL side.
Amazing.
And you can imagine that all the local football teams didn't want to give us any footballers.
No, of course not. No.
It was look, it's quite an interesting thing because Traralgon decided, because they were taking all the risks, that they wouldn't call themselves Gippsland, but they would be Traralgon. And I still remember to this day handing out the jumpers before the first game, and I handed 2 Traralgon jumpers to 2 Morwell players. And one of them looked at me, and we had a really good relationship. He looked at me and says, "I don't know whether I can pull this jumper on."
Wow.
Because Morwell and Traralgon were arch enemies.
Yeah, sure.
It would be like the Melbourne and Collingwood of the 50s and 60s.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was very interesting times, and it was great for somebody like me who loved sports administration, and I always cherish that time.
He's a very reserved individual, very deep thinking on any decisions, very good as a social beast when he lets fly, and very fair, good, honest person. That's how I would describe Mark Seymour.
Sports fans radio, bit of a cult following.
Yes.
Community radio, online, etc. It's been going for a very, very long time. How did that start, and why did you do it?
Actually, I wanted to make a TV show.
Did you?
Yes, but didn't have the money. And a friend of mine was doing a bowl show at 88.3, and he said, "Why don't you come down and have a look, sit in the background, and we'll introduce you to a few people, and if you're interested in having a radio show, look, talk to somebody and you might get on."
Might happen.
So I went and sat there during their bowl show, and they were asking all these questions, and I was piping up in the background with some answers, and that's actually where I got the name The Professor, because they said, "Well, you've got all the answers, you must be the Professor."
Ah, right.
So that's where that came from. And I spoke with Mark Misson and put in a program proposal, and next thing I know, Sports Fan Radio's on air on a Sunday at midday.
And ran for how long?
6.5 years.
I thought it was longer than that.
No, 6.5 years.
So somewhere amongst all this, and perhaps it's that southern suburbs connection, and
It is.
maintaining the Bentley relationship, and there were various roles there, and I think these are your words, Steve Barnes collared you and persuaded you to join the Southern Football League board.
Do you know where he collared me? He collared me at 88.3 because he was doing the radio show
Of course, yeah.
before me. So he's walked out of his radio show, and he's looked at me and he says, "I want to talk to you." I said, and you know, when Steve Barnes tells you he wants to talk to you, you're going to listen.
Correct.
And so I can still remember my show's supposed to be starting, and he's still talking to me. And I said, "Barnesy, I've got to go and start the show."
Yeah.
And he said, no, look, I want to talk to you about this. I want you to think about coming on the board of the Southern Football League. And I've just said to Barnes, no, look, I just don't have enough time. I've got this radio show, I'm very busy at work, I don't have enough time.
Sure.
And so Barnsley said, well, all right, but this isn't the end of it. Anyway, he walked off. Anyway, the next week, same thing. I want you to think about coming up. No, Barnsley, I can't. Anyway, so Barnsley's very well prepared. So Barnsley looks at me and he says, listen, you and I are old McKinnon boys, and you started your football in this area, and it's about time you're done, we'll put something back into it.
He's played that old card, the
Yep.
McKinnon card, okay.
Well, you know what? It was the only card that he had that would... I remember driving home from my radio show that day, feeling really bad that I've sort of blown him off and said, no, look, I can't do it. So I rang him and I said, okay, all right, I'll try it. I'll see how it goes. Because remember, Barnes, I'm in the city and you're talking about the southern suburbs. I've got to come out all the way out here. He said, oh, don't talk to me about that. He said, you just get out here. So I went to my first annual meeting, and it was the annual meeting where there was the discussion of whether there would be a TV show, continue to be a TV show or not. Yes. And you would remember that one, Ian. There was a little bit of blood on the floor.
Yeah, I'm involved in a presidential capacity.
Yes, and I remember walking out of the annual meeting thinking, my goodness, what have I got myself into? Yeah.
So now you credit David Andrew, the SFL chairman at the time,
yes,
your predecessor as chairman, as the man who started the rebuild
yes.
of the league.
Yeah, he was the right man for the job. He had a vision of where he wanted to get to, and he came on to the board as chairman and said, I will stay for 3 years and then that's it.
Right.
I will help for 3 years, I'll give it everything I've got, and then I'll get out. And if I look at, I wasn't there at the time he took over, but I've spoken to Gary Cranny, Steve Barnes and other board members of the time, and I know how it was when that board came together under David Andrew, and he left the league in a far better position, and you've got to thank him for that, and that's really all anybody can do, is try and leave it in a better position.
Sure. No, I hear you there. And of course then when he does depart, you take over as the chairman of the league. What was going through your mind when you were elected chairman?
I thought that I probably had the experience and the ideas from what I'd done in my past to bring the group together and probably try and take it to the next level.
Sure.
Away from football, Mark Seymour was a person that was always good at listening and working out a solution to a problem. In the early days of the Southern Football League, we had plenty of those problems. And to be able to sit down with a person of Mark's intelligence and to discuss a viable option to exceed the expectations of our very difficult customers, our clubs, was something that I treasured. He's been a wonderful servant. His contribution is in two parts. One, to be involved in the survival of this great league, but then to have the vision with his board and a very clever administration to be able to grow the league and to be competitive with our other sports and other leagues in this district.
There's been some tough decisions along the way around the culture, but there's been some others too around development of just that inclusiveness around the brand. Highly instrumental, obviously, as chairman in the introduction of netball.
Yes.
To the sporting community under the Southern banner.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about some of the challenges there, how that happened, and why was it important to the brand?
The importance is to try and improve numbers at a football club. The usual methods of increasing numbers at a football club is to get more football teams. Now, sometimes you can't do that.
Yeah.
Clubs have difficulty attracting underage children or young adults. That's fair enough. But you had to get away from just having a seniors and reserves team, because that gives you basically 50 people. And I think Wayne Holdsworth used the term critical mass. And I said to him, well, what's that? And he said, it's having the numbers that you've got a financially viable football club. And so one of the ways of increasing numbers was to look at netball. And that wasn't my idea. The league had an idea, if you like, of doing netball for quite some time.
Yeah, sure.
it was trying to move it from an idea, well, and you will have, in your experience in football, have heard people say, well, we've got to do that. And you've been going for 10 years and somebody will still be saying, we've got to do that, and it never happens.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we were just lucky. We had two women who were very fixated on trying to get something done. So from the contribution of two significant women, them picking it up and running with it means that we've got netball today. And without that, we would still be going, you know what, we need to have a netball, we need to have a netball competition.
Yeah, true enough. I think that's, in terms of being able to empower people to, as a leader, to be able to execute that. There's been a lot of changes and improvements, and it's just outside of not just netball that you've presided over.
Well, when you look at the time that Mark became president, we'd started to just stabilise the ship, so to speak, but we hadn't commenced the process of actually turning it round in the right direction and sailing into, some fair weather waters. Mark managed to do that with his own very calm and approach to things. It was a great contribution. 7 years, if you haven't held these types of offices on a volunteer basis, you don't appreciate the level of commitment and time and effort that goes into them. And when you've got a professional life and you've got a family that are also competing for your time and that, I think, it warrants people to sit back and actually think about and applaud the contributions of people like Mark Seymour.
So Mark, your love for the Bentley Football Club, but they're working hard towards the league. But somewhere along the line, one of the great achievements in your own mind, and you're on the record as saying this, was having the Bentley Football Club come back to the Southern Football League. Why was that a good thing?
Well, it finally gave the league something to hang their hat on to say that, well, we've got credibility. We're actually doing the right things. We're interesting people. Bentley had left the league because it had become an arms race in Division 1 with Noble Park and Baldwin, and they found that they just couldn't match it and spend that money, and the chances of actually winning a premiership or being at the top was getting harder and harder every year. And so they went to the VAFA, and that's well known as to why they left.
Yeah, sure.
And to have them change their mind sometime later and decide that they would come back indicated to everybody, including the Bentley people, that, well, we can come back and not spend a fortune and be competitive. And to have one of your old clubs come back, I think that's when everybody sat up and said, oh, geez, that's interesting.
We're doing something right.
Yeah.
Yeah, good one.
And once you've got one, then it makes it easier to go and approach other clubs. Because at the time we approached Bentley, we also approached Keysborough. And Keysborough gave us a good hearing and eventually came back to us and said, well, look, this was pretty close, but you don't have netball. And so we're going to stay where we are. Wind the clock forward several years, the league has netball, and suddenly it's not such a big gap for Keysborough to jump because they've now got somewhere where their girls can play netball.
Yeah.
And so that
it's not just the introduction of new clubs either, Mark. It's also the reputation for working closely with existing clubs and protecting their interests and making sure that they've got their ducks lined up on and off the field. Well, that's part of that culture shift, isn't it?
That's right. And if you look at some facts and figures, we've had not only clubs coming from other leagues, but also the league's been instrumental in helping new clubs start up. So if you have a look at, since I've been on the board, we've had Hallam, Endeavour Hills, Karen Patterson Lakes, and now Lyndhurst. So that's 4 new clubs which adds to the number of clubs that we've got. So not only have you got critical mass for a football club, you've also got critical mass for a league.
Yeah.
And so I think it's terrific. I don't know any other league in Australia that's had that many new clubs start up. All we usually hear is clubs merging or folding.
disappearing.
That's right. So it's a terrific thing for the league.
He's extremely deserving of being inducted into the Southern Football League Hall of Fame, and I know he would be absolutely rapt because he's passionate about football, even though originally he was a swimmer. And look, you've got to, at the end of the day, it's having good governance in any organisation. And Mark was the chairman of the governance for the last 7 years, so I think it speaks for itself.
The amount of time Mark Seymour put into this league as a volunteer and the expertise he devoted to this league, that's immeasurable. And the way in which he went about it in a calm and calculated and very supportive way says volumes about Mark Seymour, the person. And he epitomises a good community football leader.
He's highly deserving, unquestionably deserving. And it could have perhaps happened earlier, but he vacated the chairmanship and the board in the last 12 months. So it's probably appropriate that immediately after that, we recognise, very publicly, our appreciation of the qualities of Mark Seymour.
Mark, the Hall of Fame committee was established last year,
Yes.
the inaugural Hall of Fame last year, the original inductees. And of course now you, inducted into the Southern Football and Netball League Hall of Fame. What does that mean to you?
That means a tremendous amount. Somebody asked me about it the other day. They said, how do you feel? I said, well, I feel humbled that people think that I've done enough to be in the same Hall of Fame as Kingsley Ellis or Stephen Barnes or others who've given many, 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 many years to their football clubs or the league. Humbled.
Well, Mark, I can say it's been an absolute pleasure working with you, as I did for some time in the boardroom. And any time I get to see you at the footy, I know there's a lot of other people would probably say the same thing. Your contribution has been significant. Congratulations on being inducted into the Hall of Fame, and thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks very much, Ian.
Well done.
Cheers.